A very good morning. Welcome to this edition of Morning at NTV. It's on this wonderful Thursday morning, the 11th day of May, 2017. Well, for a long time, we continue to grapple with many issues as a country. But what seems to stick its ugly head up every other time we are looking for a solution that would direct us into that middle income status or that development stature we want for a country, then unemployment rears its ugly head. There are statistics that go about to tell us how over 80% of the country's youth, and we're talking about the youth being over perhaps 90% of the country's population, and we're told that over 80% of that huge demographic of our country is unemployed. I, for the most part, also argue that many are unemployed because perhaps they're unemployable. They have bad work ethic. They have a negative attitude towards the whole idea of working hard to deserve and earn your bread at the end of the day. But of course, a lot continues to be said in the area of unemployment. And of course, the huge government interventions to ensure that there are jobs created. I must admit that seems to be too little, too late. The private sector is doing its part, but still it's unable to absorb all those that require jobs. But studies and the jury is still out there to break it down. Make us appreciate, number one, what causes these high levels of unemployment? What makes us an unemployable population? This morning on the program, I have with me Mr. Yusuf Kiranda, who is now into some serious research, and part of your research has been about employment, entrepreneurship, and education in Uganda. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Simon, and good morning to our listener. Thank you for hosting me.
You're a director of a think and do tank. I only thought there were only think tanks, but now you're told that there's a think tank and a do tank.
Yes, exactly. And what brings about that is the view that we shouldn't stop at generating ideas and throwing them in the market and leave them to fate. We need to partner with state and non-state actors who are working on the issues on which we are developing ideas to pilot these ideas with the view that those which work can be scaled up, but also we have the opportunity to learn from those which don't work. That's why we think and do tank.
I love that. And the name of that think and do tank is called the Center for Development Alternatives.
Yes.
You've recently carried out a research which you've published in a book, and you subtitle it as a reality check. And in this research, you're trying to find out exactly whether the levels of unemployment, as has for a long time been touted, are actually the way they are, and whether the causes for that unemployment are what we've been told they are, and the solutions that have previously been mooted by both state and non-state actors are exactly doing what they are meant to do. Tell us something about this research.
Exactly. And Simon, for the last 6 months, the Center for Development Alternatives has been working with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the German political foundation, to try and look closely on the issue of employment in this country. And what we find out is that the employment or unemployment situation in Uganda has been seriously misrepresented. Just to give an example of how you started, you mentioned more than 80% of Ugandan young people are unemployed. Now, when you look around, there are quite a number of reports. If you just Google youth unemployment in Uganda, the first thing you see is Wikipedia saying 83% of Ugandan youth are unemployed. There is a popular article, most searched article by The Guardian, global acclaimed Guardian, also saying over 83% of Ugandan youth are unemployed. But when you look at both these sources, they cite a report by the African Development Bank in 2013, which wrote and said, and I quote, "The share of youth among the unemployed population can be as high as 83% in Uganda." That report does not mention youth unemployment figures anywhere else in Uganda. So you see how two major sources about youth unemployment
can be so
misinterpret a different figure. So the statistic is wrong. And there are very many reports by local organizations and local researchers which talk about 64%, 70%. And incidentally, most of these do not have any evidence. Somebody conducts a survey of about, say, 1,000 youth and asks them are employed or not, and takes that as a sample to suggest that the youth unemployment rate is at this figure. So
I have a friend of mine with whom I do this morning program called Joel. He believes, one, that for one to know whether you have a malaria bug in your body, you don't have to drain out the entire 6 liters in the human body.
Yes.
Just take a small little drop, and you can tell whether someone has Plasmodium plus or not. Then he's also the kind that is always here spewing these very fallacious figures, many of which I question. But he says, no, this is the empiric one, or that he tells you how there is a, I think he calls it an omnibus or an airbus of women dying every single minute in Uganda. And I'm asking myself, those statistics don't seem to be reflective on the wealth of coffin makers. Are these people just dumped in the bush or something like that? So we have not been able to debunk many of the famously and popularly thrown at us statistics. You go out to carry out this research. What did you find? So
what we do first of all is we look at large-scale household surveys by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. And just to emphasize, unemployment figures can be difficult because on principle we have serious data issues. Even UBOS keeps changing the methodology each year. But according to UBOS, headline unemployment is 9.4%. Now that might appear very rosy and admirable to even industrialized countries. What you don't see in these statistics, if you look at it at face value, is that these employment figures do not take into account people in the working age population who are in subsistence agriculture. That's around 6 million people. It doesn't take account people in full-time education. That's around 1.6 million. And then it considers people who are unemployed as employed, because unemployment does not mean unemployment. For sure. So you have about 1 million people who are either employed part-time, they work either 1 day a week or half a day. They would like to work more, but there's not just enough work for them. You have people who are doing jobs which are far below their qualifications. You have a teacher riding a boda, you have a lawyer vending in a hardware shop, and then you have the working poor. Around 1 million people who are in jobs are living below the poverty line. From hand to mouth. Yes. So the first thing our debate, our report clarifies is that the main employment challenge in Uganda is unemployment, not unemployment. People have something they are doing, but it's not sufficient either in terms of employing them full-time, either in terms of befitting the skills they have, or in terms of making sure they are appropriately remunerated for what they do. The second thing we look at are the causes of unemployment in this country. Again, I will go back to introduction. You said many people are unemployable, they have a bad work ethic, they have a bad attitude, and this is what again you read in the narrative which is going around. Blaming the victim. You don't have a job because you don't have good skills. You don't have a job because your attitude is bad. Now look, there is no evidence to support these claims. They are stories which have been built. It's a dominant narrative, and it befits, it kind of covers the wound. If you're a policymaker, if you're responsible for creating jobs, and there is a narrative out there which blames the victim, it's easy to keep telling that, and young people also have somehow taken up that narrative and they keep repeating it.
Yusuf, have you had an opportunity to employ some people?
Yes. At least
how lucky are you that you employ people who, when you tell them 8, it's 8 o'clock, they mean business, they are always, you give them terms of reference and they are on them exactly. And you've never had the opportunity to fire someone for incompetence or the absence. They have the competence in terms of mental skills and all that, but their attitude, their character, their conduct is unbefitting. You've been so lucky, aren't you?
No, these challenges of attitude and conduct and people who get fired for certain inabilities to perform at jobs happen everywhere in the world. So we don't have any evidence.
Have you had an opportunity? You were recently in London. When you take your shirt to a tailor in London, another one takes it here to Chiyembe, and both tailors tell you, come on Tuesday. Where do you think there is 100% chance that on Tuesday your thing will be ready?
No, I didn't take my shirt to a tailor in London, unfortunately. But what I want to say, sanction is unrules.
So when you get
and how does that affect behavior, we can have another conversation on that.
I think you may need to redirect your research in that area. Have you been to a Ugandan restaurant, say at about 8 a.m. in the morning?
Yes.
Oftentimes the waitresses, for the most part, will look at you like they are doing you a favor. The pace at which they will be moving, the facial expression. You've gone in there to eat and spend your hard-earned money, but the way they look at you. Ditto that with the lady you'll find on Burger King on Oxford Street in London, and the quick steps they are making and how courteous they are to you and all that.
Yes, Simon, we are not trying to discount the relevance of those conversations on issues like productivity and how companies expand. But I think that is the smallest part of the puzzle. Because, I mean, the arguments on unemployment can be looked at from two sides, and this is what we question in this report. Is it an issue of labor supply, meaning low skills, poor attitude towards work, unwillingness of young people to go in agriculture, inability of people to start their own business, or is it on the labor demand side, that there are simply few jobs in the economy to absorb all the people who are available, able, and willing to offer their labor? And what we find is that Uganda's primary unemployment challenge is limited labor demand growth. There are simply few jobs. And this is occurring because either farms are not growing to employ more workers, or new farms are not joining the market and staying on to be able to employ more workers. Employment expands if you have companies in the economy growing and hiring more workers. What is happening is that our companies, especially SMEs, are not expanding to grow more, to hire more workers. And now the growth of companies takes you into a different dynamic, a different economic conversation on what facilitates, what kind of constraints make it difficult for farmers to grow in an economy. Well, the issue of skills matters to the extent that we are talking about, for example, do we get good managers to run these companies which start up for them to expand and hire more workers? Do we get the skills to attract investors? But investors don't come in an economy simply because of skills. They come because of a broader business environment, infrastructure, the trade environment, the regulatory policies you have in place. And these issues are what we find in our report as binding constraints to farm growth, and for that matter, binding constraints to employment expansion. And this debate on skills, on education, is crafted in such a way that you make the person at the center of the problem to appear like he's the one entirely responsible for their problem. Look at the issue of saying Uganda's education system is not employing its graduates to be entrepreneurs. The statistics we have around, Uganda is the second entrepreneurial country in the world after Cameroon. Look at that. Now, how can we search? Yes, and we debunk that in our report. That we find, we say, okay, there are two types of entrepreneurs. You have people who start a business simply because they don't have anything else to do. They are survivalists. Do you know that buying and riding your own boda is a business?
True.
So many people buy a boda simply because they don't have anything else to do. Many people will start a restaurant. Many of these small boutiques you find around are started because people don't have jobs. So they are so-called survivalists, yeah, necessity-driven entrepreneurs, if you may want to use that. And usually such businesses, many don't even live to see their first birthday. Many don't grow and just hang on. The kind of entrepreneurs an economy needs are the so-called opportunity-driven entrepreneurs. That you see a business opportunity in an economy and you build an idea around it to start an enterprise which has the potential to grow and create more jobs.
And act as a mutual reinforcement.
Now, those things need a dynamic economy, they need a supporting business environment, and so on and so forth.
And an entrepreneurial mind.
Yes, an entrepreneurial mind. But those issues are lacking in the economy. And so even when we have conversations about entrepreneurship, we need to be asking questions: what enables successful entrepreneurs to emerge? What enables opportunity-driven entrepreneurs to emerge in an economy? And that is what we say in this report is just more than saying that either people don't want to start a business or people do not have the ability to start their own business.
So your report is telling us largely what perhaps exists and we know.
No, yes, somehow this exists, but we always tend to keep it under the carpet.
To those who are afflicted by it and affected, for the most part, they know. To a large extent, they know. I mean, because you picked it from them as their reality. It's the reality that they face every single day. Now, one would beg the question, how then do I get out of this reality to become more productive, to have a job commensurate to my qualification, and to be able to be effectively remunerated for the energy and skill I put in? As a do tank, what then are you doing?
So the first thing we are doing now, with this report at hand, we are sitting with about 80 young people. We have a conference going on together with our partners, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Plan International, Democratic Governance Facility, and Restless Development.
I love that governance.
Yes, what we are doing now is to first and foremost get the younger people receive a better explanation about what the employment situation is and what causes it. And that we believe is going to influence at least the noise we make. So instead of going to ask change the education system, improve skills development, we are going to be asking for government to provide an enabling environment which addresses the binding constraints to the growth of farms, and for that matter address the constraints to unemployment. And that is one thing that we can do. But the second thing, by trying to reframe this discourse, we are hoping that we can now redirect policy making and also labor market intervention. Is the things we do with the view to promote employment should be seeking to lift constraints in areas that matter to job creation. And the strategy for doing so also should be applied in such a way that we know this works, and try to somehow move away from, I was having a conversation with my friend from MOBS the other day, and he called them observables. These huge projects, white elephant projects, which do not show any chance that they have the potential to expand employment. I can give you two examples, and we'll look at them in this report. We had the presidential initiative on banana industrial development. You saw that.
I did.
Investing too much money in processing bananas, and the question is, do you expect a Ugandan to buy processed bananas, which are most likely going to be more expensive when the fresh banana is just close?
Back here.
And do you expect...
Have you checked the price of bananas lately?
Yeah? Yes, it's high, of course, but I don't expect the processed ones would have been cheaper. And then you look at the international market for bananas.
For you, when you were in Germany or UK or anything, really you can't go with a bunch of fresh bananas in your suitcase and expect it to last a week to have ripened. But you can go with your toke flour, toke chips.
Do you think we have a sufficient number of Ugandans out there who have the potential to provide a market for bananas to sustain a domestic market? Remember, if you have international visitors here, they only eat bananas just for testing. They don't eat it the next day. Now we move into cars. Fantastic. These things look brilliant. But do we have the capacity? Do we have the competitive ability, the comparative advantage to manufacture cars? So the conversation we introduced in this
China,
report,
which neighbors Japan, which is the world's biggest auto manufacturer, if they had that attitude of do we have a competitive advantage, they wouldn't be in position to have their own car manufacturing plants. Now they are doing all these Sino trucks, they are doing incredible SUVs that are rivaling Toyota VXCs called Trump Chi. I love the name. So it's about a country starting. You choose to say, I will start.
You see,
don't say because we are 100 doctors on this village, if I became the 100th and first, then I will not have an opportunity to ply my trade. Perhaps you don't,
Simon, the resources we have to invest in growth, in expanding employment are very limited. And when you have limited resources, the most important thing is prioritization. Where is my best shot? So look at crops. Is our best shot in bananas or coffee? Look at sectors. Is our best shot in cars,
manufacturing,
or in agriculture? And you have to think, this is a fundamental question that has to be addressed. The argument about comparative and competitive advantage does not suggest that we shouldn't think about manufacturing cars. We should even think about manufacturing airplanes. It's fine. But where do we allocate our resources first? You see, the journey for industrialization, even in the China you're talking about, starts with, first of all,
the low-hanging fruit.
So if we can increase agriculture productivity, move into agricultural processing, through backward and forward linkages, the potential for industrialization starts to grow.
I hear these very words you're using in every state of the nation address that the president bestows onto this nation, and for the last 30 years. So what happens? Is it just talk and no action? How do we, and that should be really my final question, Yusuf, we have incredible ideas. I mean, look, your reports are giving magic bullets, so to speak. But how do you translate this into actions that actually have results that are tangible, that you and I can touch and feel?
I'm not going to say it's easy. Issues which involve political policy change are quite complicated because you always start from a status quo. A status quo only exists because it either benefits some people or it makes life easy for others, that you don't have to go into sophisticated things. But in the end, change occurs when influential decision makers are persuaded to buy into the ideas you're selling. So either you convince them that this too is in your interest, the common good is also good for you, or you exert some incredible amount of pressure that the decision makers feel that if we do not respond to this demand, we are most likely to lose on our own side. So in the end, it still becomes in their own interest. And I think it doesn't have to be either or. So on one hand, it's going to be important that people who are campaigning about growth and about jobs are equipped with the right strategies that work, interpret the figures and the narratives in the right way. Are interpreting,
No, are equipped.
Yes, exactly.
This is done.
Yeah.
This should be done.
Yes.
This should be said.
Yeah.
And that's where my question comes.
So they campaign for what matters.
By who? Who bears that card?
So I think that's where the role of organization is in the private sector. For example, you have Uganda Private Sector Foundation, you have Uganda Manufacturers Association, you have Uganda Small Scale Industries. Yes, exactly. And we have in our conference, we have all of them participating.
Being in a conference, we go to a hotel room and everyone is making all these high-sounding grand speeches to look nice and get an applause. But when the curtains close on that conference, is someone taking on the heavy lifting?
So that's why
for me, that would be the measure of the success, not how many participants attended your conference and how many of them signed for a per diem, but exactly what comes out of it into real tangibility. And that's why I want to challenge you, because you see, Yusuf, Center for Development Alternatives sounds like 100 other think tanks, non-government organizations, whatever you want to call all these structures around. But I think what should distinguish you, having told us that you're a do tank, is your ability to come here and show me tangible results. And I don't say what you have done in showing me a report on a white piece of paper is anything wrong. No, I think ideas are important to be generated and documented.
Yes.
But I think the challenge remains in your backyard. That Yusuf, these ideas, great and incredible as they sound and look, should be stress tested. And you should ensure that someone is bearing the cat.
Yes. And that is primarily why the second strategy in our approach is important.
Which is?
So on one side, as you strengthen the demand side, so to speak, we carefully work with state actors. And let us understand the issue of providing public goods and services and the policy framework is primarily a responsibility of the state. And careful negotiation is with the state and advisory services to state departments, the National Planning Authority, the responsible parliamentary committees, the responsible government departments, on first of all, making them to understand what exactly the problem is, what are its causes, and what can be done about it is important. That's why beyond the conversation we have in conference halls like the one which is going on now, there's a lot of discussion we are having behind the scenes with influential decision makers in government. We believe at CDA that change will only occur if we can persuade people in government, and I use the word persuade here very carefully, than force. If we can persuade people in government to understand that what we are presenting works, that what we are presenting is not intended to exterminate their participation in the politics or in the economy of this country, but rather it's for building the transformation which they themselves are also talking about. So we are not saying that we will just meet in conference rooms, but we are saying that we should get a result in terms of what is done either by the government or by the private sector to make it possible for existing opportunities within the economy to be exploited for the growth of our companies and for those companies to be able to provide more decent jobs. And
Incredible.
one other thing we look at, which is quite often ignored in the studies, is that many work opportunities in countries like ours are based in household enterprises, whether on the farm, like your maize shamba, your coffee shamba, or off farm, like if somebody buys his own taxi and hires his cousin as a conductor, or your own shop or a stall in Parkyard Market when it used to exist. So how can we focus conversation is also on these household enterprises, which are often informal, which are not taken into account when we are discussing issues of employment, to make sure that they can become more productive, first and foremost, because if they become more productive, the people who work in them can earn more, and the jobs in those enterprises can also become decent jobs.
Incredible, Yusuf. On the other hand, still going on with my challenge, I hope that someone at the Ministry of Labor, Social Development, Gender, whatever, that ministry is a large one, is listening to you and listening keenly.
Yeah, and we will be in their boardroom soon also. So it would be fantastic if they are listening, but even if they are not, we are going to get there.
Thanks, Yusuf, for coming here to share with us these wonderful insights into employment, entrepreneurship, and education in Uganda. And by way of your research and recommendations therein, we hope that perhaps then this can come to fruition and we have a country that is not bogged down by these very nasty statistics that we are hit at every day with. And also the sad reality on the ground where you have young people unable to be employed commensurate to their skills and perhaps the education that they have.
Thank you very much, Simon.
And for the viewers, sorry, it's a pleasure having you listening through these conversations. Let's take a breather. When we return, it's more quality programming here on Morning at NTV with Everyday Life.
You're watching